Welcome to Part 4 of our series on negotiating fundamentals. I'm Deb Calvert with People First Productivity Solutions, and this 4-part series has focused on the basics, the fundamentals of negotiating. If you are just starting here at Part 4, let me strongly encourage you to go back to Parts 1, 2, and 3, because in this part we'll focus on questions to ask at each phase of the negotiation. And some of the terminology that I use and the scenarios that I refer to were referenced in those earlier parts and might not quite make sense to you here. Let me clarify. Negotiating fundamentals is just that, the basics. But what you're going to hear in this 4-part series has absolute relevance in all different sorts of negotiating scenarios. You might be at a very advanced level or an intermediate level of negotiation. You could be working with professional paid negotiators or C-suite executives. It doesn't matter. These fundamentals are critical to the success of any negotiation. In fact, as I observe sales reps and coach them, what I find over and over again is that the mistakes they make in negotiating are almost always related to these fundamentals. Today's session is the 4th and final in the series. And in this one, we're going to talk about how negotiations really rely on preparation. And during the negotiation, the control that you will have, the confidence and the competence that you'll be able to exhibit come from 2 things: preparation, which we've talked about in our first 3 sessions, and questions, the questions that you ask. It seems to be one of the best kept secrets in sales that the person who asks questions is the one who's in control of the sale. Sellers who ask questions make more sales. Sellers who ask strategic questions that yield good information make more sales more quickly and for more money. Asking questions helps you to steer conversations. Asking questions provides vital information that enables you to understand and respond to your customers' needs more effectively. In a negotiation, there's a lot of information you need in order to steer the tough conversations that you're having and to keep the focus on what's of high value to you and to your customer. If you're not asking the kinds of questions that we'll discuss here today, then you simply are not in control of the negotiation. You're over-relying instead on good luck and on the charity of the other party. It's so much better to be in control. First things first. In order to ask good questions, you have to understand question structure. The quality of your questions will determine the quality of the information you get back in the response. So let's talk about 2 different types of questions: closed-ended and open-ended. Open-ended having yet another nuance above and beyond, which I'll call command statements. Closed-ended questions, as you can see on screen, those are the ones that start with helper verbs. Closed-ended questions can be answered with a simple yes or no. And at times in a negotiation, that might be exactly what you need, just a simple yes or no answer, in which case you would intentionally phrase your question as a close-ended question. You want to use this question construction when that's all you want. An example of a close-ended question, starting with a helper verb, is reducing your budget the number 1 priority? You are forcing the person you're talking to give you a short answer, a declarative yes or no. For much of your information gathering, though, you'll find that open-ended questions are much more productive. These are the kinds of questions that cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. They require some thought before being answered, and they yield far more information than close-ended questions do. Even when your respondent is one of those generous types who elaborates on the initial yes or no, even those folks are going to give you less in response to a close-ended question than they would if you had phrased it as an open-ended question. When you ask open-ended questions, you open up new dialogue. You get more information. You seize control even though you won't know exactly where the answer might take you. Using the 5 W's and H question words will help you gather more information. Stronger still is the command statement. This is actually not a question at all, but it will generate longer responses with more information that have more thought put into them. For the most important information that you're gathering, use statements that sound like this. Explain your decision-making criteria to me. Help me to understand what led to this conclusion. Describe, please, your thoughts about the options that I've proposed to you. Tell me more about the quality concerns and how they'll influence your selection. Command statements are a form of open-ended questions that yield the most information. You don't want to form every question crafted as a command statement because after a while, since there are only a few words that you can start with, those kinds of questions will begin to sound a little repetitive. Ideally, you'll have a great mix of open-ended and command statement questions, and when all you want is a simple yes-no short answer, you'll go directly to a close-ended question construction to suit that purpose. Now, what you'll be seeing next is a series of slides with questions. And these are questions that you can take and use for the various parts of a negotiation. These are all parts and steps that have been introduced to you in the first 3 workshops of this series. While these questions are on screen, what I'll be doing is briefly recapping what we're looking for in each step and describing the intention behind each question. This is all about being strategic. Planning these questions, not in a scripted way that's forced and unnatural, but having these questions in your hip pocket so that you're able to ask them at the time that they make sense, gives you the keys so that when you come to a locked door in the negotiation, you can walk on through. This first slide, this one is about asking questions that help you to determine the other party's perception about your value to them. Ideally, the time to ask these would be before the formal negotiation. If you have a client that you work with on a regular basis, you'd want to be doing needs assessment on a regular basis anyway. But as you approach the negotiation, even as you're setting the appointment, these are great questions to be able to ask so that your preparation will be all the more on target. If you have no other choice, these can also work at the early stages of the negotiating meeting itself. Now, these are questions that most salespeople never think to ask. But they're fair questions that usually get answers that are quite complete and often surprising. With just these 3 examples that you see on screen, just these 3 questions, here's what you would know. You would know the customer's BATNA, their best alternative to a negotiated agreement. You'd know what they value most about working with you and why they are considering you in the first place, their rationale. Knowing all of this would certainly have helped Moffett Studios when they received that telegraph from Teddy Roosevelt's campaign manager. In addition to questions that help to determine your value to the customer, you also want to be able to ask some questions, ideally before the negotiation, to understand what it is that they value. Now remember, value is something that's truly unique. You can't ever assume that you know what's important for anyone. Value changes conditionally, circumstantially, person to person, depending on what's going on, what else is surrounding them. These questions will help you to identify what matters and the order of importance, the hierarchy of needs that your customer may have. On top of that, these questions actually add value, and people will hold you in high regard when you ask them questions like this because they make people pause to think, to consider and declare what does matter to them. When then you'd come back and you deliver solutions that address the value the customer has articulated, you set yourself up to succeed. There's nothing more compelling than someone's own unique values being understood and met. We've also talked about the role of urgency in a negotiation. There's no reason at all that you have to accept a continuance between the negotiation and the decision. Oftentimes, a delay like that is nothing more than a tactic, and it's meant to alarm you so that you'll make some additional concessions. Within any negotiation, there should be a time limit attached to every concession that you make. When the other party asks you for more time, you can make honoring the request conditional on other terms. And in fact, you should do so. Why should your special offers remain open indefinitely? The questions you see on screen are not comfortable for some sales reps to ask. I've heard opinions that these are too aggressive, too intrusive, too pushy. But let's look at this a different way. If you are offering a solution that meets the customer's needs, shouldn't you try to help them adopt that solution as soon as possible? And isn't it only fair that you know as soon as possible what's standing in the way? Plus, as busy as both you and your customer are, does a delay and another meeting really serve either of you that well? Most people, you'll be glad to know, most people don't respond negatively to these types of questions. When there is pushback, it's usually mild. It's the customer saying something like, well, I really need to sleep on this. I just don't make same-day decisions. No harm, no foul, and they see that you mean business and that you are confident too. Now, we had in a previous session, session 2, a discussion about the 5 different types of conflict. And we talked about how and when each of those conflict styles is appropriately used in negotiation. What I'd like to do now is add to that for each of the 5 conflict styles. And what I'm showing you here are questions that you can ask if the other party has reverted to that type of a style. So you're dealing with someone who has adopted one of these behavior styles, and you would like to try to break through that or to try to move the negotiation forward. So these questions are meant to help you with that. Okay, for this one, the avoiding style, these questions could even be presented if you are truly being avoided and they won't talk to you. You could even present these questions in an email or a voicemail. One of these choices will be sufficient. You don't have to ask 2 or 3 of these. What you want to do, though, is keep the tone neutral and non-threatening. You want to express your interest to deliver on what was of value to the customer. So the questions are not meant to threaten, they're not to intimidate, they're not to push, but they are meant to probe and to expose the fact that you know the game. You know there's an avoidance going here, and you're just looking to be able to break through that. The second style we talked about was accommodating. Now, what you see on screen here with these questions, this isn't so much about gathering information as it is about turning off the tap. Because remember, if the other party is accommodating you, that means they're giving in a lot to you without asking for anything in return. So this is not about being rude, and it's not that you are ungracious. This is about understanding that there's more going on than meets the eye anytime somebody starts giving things away in a negotiation. So there are also questions to be asking yourself here. What do they really want? Which of these offers is truly going to be of value to me? How deep in debt am I getting here? And that's why these questions look to turn the tap off. It's easy at the beginning of a negotiation, especially when the other party starts giving you a lot of concessions. But what you have to remember is that you need to keep a list of offers, not a list of terms you've already accepted. So make note of these. Be sure and flip it around so that you're asking, what do you expect in return for this? it's no different than asking the price of anything else that you're ever given. It is an exchange, even if it doesn't appear to be that way. The third type of conflict style, the behaviors of conflict that we talked about, was when the other party is coming across as competing. This is where it's a winner-takes-all style in negotiation. These questions are designed to call the bluff of someone who's worked themselves up into a lather, or at least wants you to believe that's how they're responding. You're taking the focus off the point that's being negotiated and putting it back on the relationship in these first two questions. This is a subtle reminder that there are important considerations that go beyond the ego or whatever it is that's driving this hyper-competitiveness. The third question, walk me through your rationale on this, please, is used when you really need to figure out the thought process. When you know the thought process that the other party is using and how they're getting to the points that they get to, you can usually then insert yourself sooner, or your ideas can come into play earlier in that process. Additionally, when people are putting on an act when there's a lot of bluster and it's meant to intimidate you, they usually can't rationally define the thoughts behind it. So this question may help you diffuse the competition behavior by peeling back this layer. If you are working with someone who is very quick to want to compromise, you'll want to open up a dialogue that points that out, rather than tries to conceal the fact that both parties in any compromise may end up being a little bit disappointed. Remember, the inherent nature of a compromise is that both parties give up something. Depending on how much they give up, there's going to be some level of disappointment. And if you leave your customer unsatisfied at the end of a negotiation, that means that they have some needs that are not met, and that equals an open door for your competitors. So rather than racing into a compromise, you at a minimum want to ask these kinds of check-in questions. This is longer-term thinking. At the moment, it may feel good for both of you to be striking a deal in this compromise, but that may not be good enough long-term. So these questions that expose some potential dissatisfaction or offer the alternative of this being a temporary compromise with a renewed negotiation to take place soon. This sort of an approach to it makes sure that those unmet needs just are not left unchecked. And then finally, the fifth conflict style that we discussed was collaboration. What we said about collaboration is that it's different from compromise because in compromise, both parties have needs that are not met. Whereas in collaboration, the conversation has been expanded, value's been added, a bigger picture perspective has been adopted, and you look to expand your zone of potential agreement, expand where you overlap and can help and partner with each other. This is time-consuming. I won't fib. It takes time. It takes trust and vulnerability, too. But if you are looking for long-term partnerships and partnerships that are going to truly pay off mutually for both parties in every possible way, these are the kinds of questions, then, that you would like to ask to open up the collaboration. Now, you'll notice in the first four of our conflict styles, I gave you questions to use if the other party were adopting that style. In this case, I'm going to assume that the other party's not adopting this style. This is pretty rare. So what I've given you here are ways to open up the dialogue that leads to this style of collaboration. Of course, since collaboration is the desired way of starting out and approaching the negotiation, if the other party is exhibiting collaborative behaviors, go with it. You don't need any questions to expose that. You just need questions to figure out how to get more of the same. So you're exploring the possibilities here. You're introducing and setting some expectations that even more can be done if the time and commitment is invested. Now, you heard me a moment ago mention with collaboration the notion of expanding the zone of potential agreement. The zone of potential agreement, or ZOPA, is where your interests and the interest of the other party overlap. Where they overlap is where you're going to be able to find a deal. If they don't overlap, you're going to be butting heads. If they overlap only a little bit, you have a very narrow band within which you can find agreement. So collaborating, expanding the conversation, and expanding that zone of potential agreement greatly heightens the opportunities you have to strike an agreement that works for everybody. These questions are very broad. They're meant to be because it's a bit like a fishing expedition. You may have prepared for the negotiation, as did the other party, focused on what you knew would be the terms of this negotiation. But now that you're looking to expand and to collaborate way outside the box, you may have to go fishing very broadly and widely in order to figure out what you can do and what needs you both have that you might be able to find common ground in. Questions like the ones that you see on screen, they promote a lot of thinking and reflection. So allow time for the thought process to happen. Don't race ahead to the next question. Don't worry about the silence. In fact, that's a good tip for any part of the negotiation. When you pose a question like this especially, though, take time to pause. A good tip for doing that is to ask yourself the same question just as you're asking the customer, because you'll pace about the same way. And if you say to your customer, tell me, what's been on your mind as the meeting approached? And then you pause to think through your own answer, that will keep you from feeling uncomfortable with the silence, and it will give them ample amounts of time to be able to answer the question. Now, we also have to talk about the preparation. So these are questions that can help you to prepare, but also questions that as you walk into the negotiation to help you understand the preparation made by the other party. We talked at length about the difference between position and interest and why it's important not only to hear the stated position, but to probe and understand the interest or the underlying reasons why someone has adopted that position. The questions that you see here now are meant to cut through the position to get to those underlying interests. Remember, we want to be motivated by the things that truly matter most to us. If we overthink about just the position that we've concluded is the direction we want to go, we will forget our own underlying motivations, our reasons, our core for wanting that position to be the outcome. And when we do that, if all we do is focus on that hard and fast position, we may miss alternatives that would equally fully satisfy the underlying interests. And it works just the same for the other party in the negotiation. They have a position too. They may or may not be thinking about their underlying interests. If you can ask some questions that bring those to the surface, you'll have all sorts of good information with which to propose alternatives that may be entirely satisfying to the other party. So don't react only to the stated position. Peel it back, find out those underlying interests using questions like these, and then you'll have so much more to work with. We talked about trade-offs, and these questions that you see would be for the trade-offs that are if then, if I do this, then you will need to do that. This also, though, refers to log rolling because you would like to not have concessions that are made without any give and take if possible. So these questions are questions to create some opportunity for thinking. They're questions to fully establish the fact that there's equal value. And they are questions that completely communicate the fact that you're not just going to give stuff away. So you ask these questions to probe and to check just how serious is the negotiator in asking for whatever they're asking for, and in pushing back to say, there's got to be something in it for me too. Here are some questions to help you understand the other party's best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Not only, though, do you have to understand their BATNA, what they perceive to be their BATNA, but you have to be able to ask questions that will reduce their perception of their own BATNA when you are in a weak negotiating position. In other words, if you don't have a strong alternative and you need this deal, and they are in a stronger position because, frankly, they've got other alternatives that are just as good. In that situation, you've got to ask questions in order to lower the perception they have about those alternatives while you heighten their perception about the value of striking a deal with you. So you ask these questions to weaken their perception of their own BATNA when you need to level the playing field because your own BATNA is weak. What you're doing here are planting seeds of doubt. And by doing that, you are demonstrating the value that you bring relative to any alternatives they may be thinking about. Okay, so that was a whirlwind of questions, and hopefully you paused a few times to jot those down. But I'd like to offer you a few more tips as you are asking questions, thinking not just about the question, but what do you do with the information? We already said, first, be comfortable with silence. Silence is where people process and think, and the questions that you're asking, these open-ended, thought-provoking questions, they merit some time for the other party to give them thought before responding. So be comfortable with that, bite your tongue, take notes, think about your own answers, whatever it takes. Do not rephrase or ask a different question. Just be comfortable in silence. That is a really good discipline to exercise because in a negotiation, there will be other times and ways that silence is important too. For example, when you make an offer, you need to be silent. And you need to be confidently silent, perhaps even maintaining eye contact while you are silent, because the first person who responds and breaks the silence, research says, is usually the one who is least confident and most likely to give up the most ground in the negotiation. Don't let that be you. It's a simple silence. When you are asking questions, don't ask these questions that I've just shown you in an effort to manipulate the conversation or to lead or push the other party into something. Instead, remember that you're asking these questions so that you can gather information. You want to learn what's of value. You want to learn about the alternatives the other party's thinking about. And what you're learning gives you opportunities to create better solutions and broader ways that you can serve and partner with this customer. If you go into it with that mindset and you let that intention be your guide, not only will you ask better questions and good drill-down follow-up questions, but you'll also be conveying that this is about a partnership and about a concern and care that you have for the customer. When you are conveying and telegraphing those kinds of messages, it comes through loud and clear, and the customer will be disarmed and will want to work with you and negotiate based around that intention. So check yourself, and as part of your preparation, get to a point where you're not feeling combative. It's not a spirit of winner takes all. It's a collaborative effort that you're looking for here. When you ask questions, a really important point in this third bullet, listen not just to the content of the response. It's more than the words that are being spoken that you want to listen for. You also want to listen for feeling. Feeling is communicated in the way that people emphasize words, the way they talk faster, slower, louder, softer. All of those clues about their feelings are things that you may want to probe, because in a negotiation, knowing what is of value and the hierarchy of that value is critically important. So if someone gets excited and starts talking really fast and using a lot of gestures and expressing some kind of feeling about something, there's a clue within that. At a minimum, you might like to ask them. You might want to say something like, wow, it sounds like that's really important to you. Tell me more about that. That's the kind of information gathering that you really want to be focused on in the negotiation. Every piece of information you gather helps you to do a better job in reaching a mutually satisfying, collaborative solution. Fourth one is also tough because your mind is going to be racing ahead. What do I say next? What is the question I need to ask? What kind of deal am I going to get here? What time is it? Because we have a time-sensitive pressure around negotiations anyway. But you want to, as much as you possibly can, you'll want to clear your mind of all those distractions and stay right there in the moment, listening, actively, carefully listening to exactly what's being said. When you stay in the moment, you'll ask better follow-up questions. You won't miss the subtle signals and cues that are being given to you, and you will be able to be so much more effective. On top of that, people just really appreciate being listened to, genuinely, truly listened to. And so you'll earn a lot of points, but just by virtue of listening. When you stay in the moment, when you focus on actively listening, you won't be racing ahead. You won't be interrupting. You won't jump on the very first clue that you hear that causes you to think you've got the deal, or you've got the solution, or you've got the alternative. You may have those thoughts. Jot them down, tuck them away, probe and learn all that you can about why this matters, what the issues are behind it, what the value is, how urgent and important is this. And then you'll be able to respond with all the information instead of just the bits and pieces. It seems obvious, but I've included take notes on this list just mainly because the mistakes I see being made are often because your adrenaline is working against you. You're excited. You're hyper excited and in hyper drive with your mind racing all over the place. Taking notes will help you focus. It will enable you to come back to things instead of trying to remember all of them. And if there is a continuance in this negotiation, which does happen quite often, you'll be able to recap it, to be able to recount it to people in your own organization, to summarize it when you come back to the negotiating table, to know what it is that were all the piece parts of that meeting. So take the notes, develop a discipline of taking good shortcut notes so that you have a record. And I've already said it, so I won't repeat that last bullet, but it is important. So be very much involved and in the moment so you can do everything you see on this list. The person who asks the questions and truly listens to the answers is the one who does have control in the negotiation. With that, we're wrapping up our 4-part series on the fundamentals of negotiation. I'd like to thank you for your participation and encourage you to share this with anybody and everybody that you like. If you have questions for me or if you'd like additional information about anything related to selling, here's my email address, deb.calvert@peoplefirstps.com. We really encourage your input. We develop tools to help out the folks who are in our Connect community, which you are now. And if you'd like to be more engaged in the Connect community, just check out our website. Make sure you go from that home page to the tab at the top that says Our Customers, and then choose on the drop-down menu the one that says Selling Professionals, and you'll find all sorts of stuff there. We offer sales training, we offer consulting and sales coaching, and we'd be delighted to talk to you about any needs that you might have. Thank you so much for your participation in this webinar series.